Hi, I'm Maria. The night my 8-year-old daughter Sophia was fighting for her life in the pediatric ICU, my family threw a barbecue party in our backyard. While I held her tiny hand as machines kept her breathing, my sister laughed into her phone, saying, "Maria's being dramatic again with that sick kid." My mother clinked wine glasses with my aunts, declaring, "Some children are just meant to go early. It's God's plan." And my brother? He was grilling steaks, telling anyone who'd listen, "Maybe this will finally teach Maria that military discipline doesn't cure everything." They celebrated while my daughter's heart monitor flatlined twice that night. I stayed silent, but behind that silence I was building their destruction. Want to know how it ends? Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this? And where are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. I hadn't slept in 47 hours straight. The pediatric intensive care unit at St. Mary's Medical Center buzzed with the constant hum of life support machines. Each beep and whir a reminder that my daughter's life hung by threads thinner than spider silk. The fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh white, making the pale green walls look sickly, institutional. The smell of disinfectant burned my nostrils, but I'd stopped noticing it hours ago. My combat boots, still laced tight from when I'd rushed here 3 days earlier, were the only familiar thing in this sterile nightmare. Sophia lay so small under the white hospital blanket that she almost disappeared into it. At 8 years old, she should have been running around our apartment, arguing about bedtime, asking me to read just one more chapter from her favorite book about dragons and brave princesses. Instead, tubes snaked from her nose and mouth, and IV lines traced delicate patterns across her arms like some cruel roadmap of suffering. Her dark hair, usually wild with curls that refused any brush, lay flat against the pillow, dampened with fever sweat. The doctors had used words like acute respiratory failure and pneumonia complications, but what they really meant was that my little girl's lungs were drowning from the inside. Every breath was a battle she might lose. Her oxygen saturation numbers flickered on the monitor beside her bed, and I'd learned to read them like battlefield intelligence reports. Anything below 92 meant panic. Anything below 88 meant calling for help. I'd become fluent in the language of medical crisis in ways no mother should ever have to. I'd pulled my chair as close to her bed as the medical equipment would allow. My right hand rested gently on her forearm, careful not to disturb the pulse oximeter clipped to her finger. My left hand held my phone, which had been buzzing constantly for the past 6 hours. Text after text, call after call, but none of them were asking about Sophia's condition. None of them were offering to bring me food or coffee or just sit with me during the longest night of my life. The first message had come in around 4 p.m., just as Sophia's fever spiked to 104 degrees. My sister Carmen's contact photo lit up the screen, her bright smile mocking the gravity of the moment. "Can't make it to the hospital? Having people over tonight, you understand." No question mark. Just a statement, like my daughter's fight for life was some minor inconvenience that conflicted with her social calendar. Then my mother's voice had crackled through a voicemail at 6:30, background noise revealing the unmistakable sounds of a gathering. Laughter, clinking glasses, music. "Mija, I know you're worried, but you have to trust God's plan. We're lighting a candle for Sophia. Oh, and bring some ice when you get a chance. We ran out." The casual tone, the assumption that I would leave my dying daughter to fetch ice for their party, hit me like a physical blow. My brother Luis had been the most direct. His text came through at 7:15, accompanied by a photo of perfectly grilled ribeye steaks. "Maria, you're spiraling again. Remember what happened after your deployment? You see threats everywhere. Sophia's gonna be fine. Kids bounce back. Stop making everything about you." The photo showed our entire extended family gathered around the patio table I'd built with my own hands after coming home from Afghanistan. Smiling faces, raised beer bottles, celebrating life while mine fought for hers 20 miles away. But it was my father's message that broke something fundamental inside me. At 8:43 p.m., as Sophia's blood pressure dropped low enough to trigger alarms, his words appeared on my screen. "Your military trauma is affecting your judgment about Sophia's condition. She's probably just got a cold. You're overreacting like always. come home and stop embarrassing the family at that hospital. Military trauma. Like surviving 2 tours in Kandahar, like losing 3 members of my unit to an IED, like coming home with shrapnel scars and nightmares, somehow made me less capable of recognizing when my own daughter was dying. Like the hypervigilance that kept me alive in a war zone was just paranoia when applied to protecting my child. Oh, whew. I'd screenshot every message. Force of habit from my intelligence analyst days. Document everything. Assume nothing. Trust. But verify. The timestamps painted a clear picture. While Sophia's oxygen levels plummeted, while doctors rushed in and out adjusting medications and ventilator settings, while I held my breath with every fluctuation in her vital signs, my family was documenting their perfect evening on social media. Carmen had posted a video to her Instagram story at 9 p.m. The camera panned across our backyard, showing at least 20 people laughing and dancing to Musica Regional. She'd tagged the location as family time at Maria's house and added crying, laughing emojis. My house. My backyard. My spare key that I'd given them for emergencies, being used to host a party while I lived through the worst night of my life. My mother appeared in Luis's Facebook livestream at 9:30, her arm around my tia Rosa, both of them holding wine glasses and smiling broadly. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to trust that everything happens for a reason. Family dinner at Maria's while she handles her situation." Her situation. My daughter's fight for life reduced to a situation, an inconvenience, a problem to be managed while they enjoyed my food, my house, my absence. The nurse who'd been assigned to Sophia's care, Jennifer, was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, who moved with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too many nights like this one. She'd brought me coffee twice without being asked, and when Sophia's fever broke slightly around 10 p.m., she'd squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "She's a fighter, just like her mama." It was the first kind word anyone had spoken to me in days. "Any family coming to visit?" Jennifer asked around 11, checking Sophia's IV line with practiced hands. I'd looked at my phone, at the stream of party photos still being posted from my own home, at the messages treating my daughter's crisis like an overreaction, at the casual cruelty wrapped in concern trolling about my mental state. "No," I'd said simply. "It's just us tonight." But even as I said those words, something had shifted inside me. The same cold calculation that had kept me alive in hostile territory, the same strategic thinking that had made me valuable to military intelligence, began clicking into place. They thought my training made me paranoid, unstable, and dramatic. They had no idea it had also made me methodical, patient, and absolutely ruthless when protecting what mattered most. Sophia stirred slightly in her sleep, her small fingers twitching against mine. The heart monitor showed her rhythm strengthening, and for the first time in hours, her oxygen saturation held steady above 95%. She was going to fight through this. She was going to survive. And when she did, when we walked out of this hospital together, my family was going to learn exactly what this veteran was capable of when they mistook her silence for weakness. I pulled out a second phone from my jacket pocket, one they didn't know existed, and began making calls. The antiseptic smell of the hospital had become so familiar it barely registered anymore, but the exhaustion was settling into my bones like old shrapnel. Sophia's breathing had stabilized around 3 a.m., her small chest rising and falling with more rhythm than it had shown in days. The ventilator's steady whoosh provided a mechanical lullaby that I'd grown to find oddly comforting. At least it meant she was still fighting. I'd been running on adrenaline and black coffee for so long that my hands had developed a slight tremor. The kind of shake that comes not from fear, but from a body pushed beyond its normal limits. It reminded me of those 72-hour intelligence missions in Kandahar, when sleep was a luxury we couldn't afford, and staying alert meant staying alive. But this was different. This was my daughter, not a forward operating base under siege. The nursing staff moved with quiet efficiency through the pre-dawn hours, their soft-soled shoes squeaking against the polished linoleum. Jennifer had gone off shift at midnight, replaced by a younger nurse named David, who approached Sophia's care with the same gentle competence. He'd introduced himself by asking if I needed anything, actually meaning it, which felt revolutionary after the past 3 days of my family treating my presence at the hospital like an inconvenience. Around 4 a.m., my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Carmen's name lit up the screen, and for a split second, Hope flickered in my chest. Maybe she was calling to check on Sophia. Maybe someone in my family had finally realized the gravity of what we were facing. Maybe they were coming to support us. Maria? Thank God you answered. Carmen's voice was slurred with alcohol, background noise confirming the party was still going strong. We need you to come home for like 10 minutes. The cops showed up because Mrs. Henderson next door called about the noise, and they're asking for the homeowner. Can you just swing by real quick and handle it? I stared at Sophia's peaceful face, at the tubes and wires that were keeping my daughter alive, at the monitors that hadn't stopped beeping for 3 straight days. Carmen, I can't leave the hospital. Sophia is. Oh my God, you're being so dramatic. The kid is sleeping, right? You said to yourself she's stable. Just come home for literally 10 minutes, talk to the cops, and come right back. Luis is handling everything else, but they specifically asked for you since it's your house. The casual dismissal in her voice, the way she reduced Sophia's critical condition to, the kid is sleeping, hit me like a physical blow. But what struck me harder was the assumption that I would abandon my daughter's bedside to clean up their mess. That their party was somehow more urgent than my child's life. I'm not leaving Sophia. Maria, you're being ridiculous. She's unconscious anyway, she won't even know you're gone. Stop being so selfish and think about the family for once. We're all here trying to have a nice time after everything that's been happening, and you're making it all about you again. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment, processing what I'd just heard. Selfish. For staying with my critically ill daughter. Making it all about me. For refusing to leave the ICU to handle their noise complaint. My second phone, the secure one from my intelligence days that I'd never deactivated, buzzed with a text from my contact at the base. Package delivered. Documentation complete. Standing by for the next phase. I'd made that call at midnight, reaching out to someone who understood that intelligence gathering wasn't just a job skill. It was a way of life. Someone who knew that when you're building a case, every piece of evidence matters. By 5 a.m., my family's social media documentation of their party had painted a complete picture. Carmen had posted 17 Instagram stories showing different angles of the gathering. Luis had gone live on Facebook 3 separate times, each stream showing more people arriving, more alcohol being consumed, more celebration happening in my home while my daughter fought for her life 20 miles away. My mother had shared photos on her Facebook page with captions like, "Family celebrations heal the heart," and "Sometimes God gives us reasons to come together in joy." But the most damaging evidence came from my cousin Miguel, who apparently thought it was hilarious to document my father's commentary throughout the evening. In a Snapchat video timestamped at 11:47 p.m., my father's voice was crystal clear. Maria always was the dramatic one in the family. Remember when she came back from Afghanistan? Everything was a crisis. Everything was life or death. Now she's doing the same thing with her kid. Some people just can't handle normal life without creating drama. The video showed him gesturing toward my house, toward the bedroom where Sophia's stuffed animals still sat on her bed, toward the photos on my mantle showing my deployment, my commendations, my struggle to rebuild a normal life after 2 tours in a combat zone. He was using my service, my sacrifice, my trauma, as evidence that I couldn't be trusted to assess my own daughter's medical condition. Another video, this one from Luis's girlfriend, posted to TikTok at 12:23 a.m., captured my mother's voice with devastating clarity. Poor Sophia probably just has a little cold, but Maria sees everything through combat goggles. She thinks everyone's an enemy, everything's an attack. We learn to just let her spin out and clean up the mess later. Combat goggles. Like the hypervigilance that kept me alive overseas was a character flaw. Like the instincts that made me valuable to military intelligence somehow disqualified me from being a mother. Like surviving mortar attacks and IED explosions made me less capable of recognizing when my child was in genuine danger. The cruelest part was how they'd positioned themselves as the reasonable ones. The family members who had to manage my alleged instability. The long-suffering relatives who tolerated my dramatic episodes out of familial obligation. They'd created a narrative where my devotion to Sophia was pathology, where my refusal to leave her bedside was evidence of my damaged mental state. David, the night nurse, approached Sophia's morning medication chart. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine concern. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the same response I'd given to superior officers, to therapists at the VA, to family members who asked without really wanting to know. He studied my face for a moment, then pulled up a second chair beside Sophia's bed. "I've been doing this for 8 years," he said quietly. "I've seen a lot of families go through nights like this. The ones who stay, who fight, who refuse to give up, those are the kids who make it through. Your daughter's lucky to have someone who won't walk away." The simplicity of his observation, the recognition that staying was strength rather than weakness, nearly broke me. I'd been trained to compartmentalize emotion, to function under extreme stress, to make life or death decisions with incomplete information. But I'd never been trained for this specific kind of warfare, fighting for my daughter's life while my own family attacked my credibility, my judgment, my right to make decisions about her care. Sophia's eyelids fluttered, the first sign of consciousness she'd shown since yesterday afternoon. I leaned forward, my hand finding hers under the tangle of medical equipment. "I'm here, baby," I whispered. "Mama's right here." Her fingers squeezed mine, barely perceptible but unmistakably intentional. The monitors showed her heart rate increasing slightly, not with distress but with awareness. She was fighting her way back to consciousness, fighting her way back to me. My secure phone buzzed again. Another text from my base contact. Additional intel acquired. Financial records accessible. Legal consultation confirmed for 0800. Recommend proceeding to the next phase. I looked at my daughter, at the tubes and wires that were becoming less necessary with each passing hour, at the monitors showing steady improvement in her vital signs. She was going to survive this. We both were. And when she was strong enough to come home, when she was ready to sleep in her own bed surrounded by her stuffed animals and picture books, my family was going to learn that underestimating a combat veteran was the worst tactical error they'd ever made. The morning shift change was beginning, fresh faces replacing the night staff who'd kept watch over Sophia's recovery. But I wasn't going anywhere. I had work to do, plans to make, evidence to compile. My family thought my silence meant submission. They were about to discover that sometimes the most devastating attacks come from the enemies you never see coming. The morning sun filtered through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across Sophia's room as her condition continued to stabilize. Her fever had broken completely around 6 a.m., and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about removing some of the more invasive monitoring equipment. For the first time in 4 days, I allowed myself to believe she was going to make a full recovery. Dr. Patricia Reeves, Sophia's primary physician, entered the room carrying a tablet and wearing the first genuine smile I'd seen from the medical staff since we'd arrived. She was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and the confident manner of someone who'd guided countless families through medical crises. "Good morning, Maria. I have some encouraging news about Sophia's progress." She pulled up a chair beside the bed, including me in the conversation rather than talking over me like some doctors did. "Her lung function has improved dramatically overnight. We're going to start weaning her off the ventilator this afternoon, and if she continues responding this well, she might be breathing on her own by tomorrow." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that my knees went weak. "She's really going to be okay?" Children are remarkably resilient, especially with the kind of advocacy she's had. "You haven't left her side once, have you?" Dr. Reeves made a note on her tablet. That kind of consistent presence during critical care makes a significant difference in pediatric recovery rates. As Dr. Reeves explained the step-down process and estimated timeline for Sophia's recovery, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. My mother's contact photo appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something made me answer, perhaps the hope that good news about Sophia might finally cut through their selfishness. "Miga, thank God you picked up." My mother's voice was strained, urgent in a way that immediately put me on alert. "We have a problem, a big problem. You need to come home right now." "Mom, I told you I'm not leaving the hospital. Sophia is. The police came back this morning with some kind of warrant or something. They're going through the house, taking pictures. asking questions about last night. Luis thinks maybe Mrs. Henderson filed some kind of complaint beyond just the noise thing. They want to talk to you specifically since it's your house. I felt my blood pressure spike, but not from panic. From calculation. What kind of questions are they asking? About who was here, how long the party lasted, whether you gave permission for us to use your house. Maria, they're treating this like we broke in or something. It's ridiculous, but they seem serious. Carmen is crying, and your father is getting angry with them, which isn't helping anything. Through the background noise of my mother's call, I could hear raised voices, official-sounding radio chatter, and what sounded like Carmen's dramatic sobbing. The chaos in my peaceful home, the invasion of my private space, the disruption of the sanctuary I'd built for Sophia and myself. Did they say what specific complaint was filed? Something about unauthorized use of property, public disturbance, and… My mother's voice dropped to a whisper. Possible breaking and entering. Maria, this is insane. We're family. You gave us that spare key for emergencies. A medical emergency involving my daughter, not a party emergency involving your social calendar. The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to hear my father's voice in the background, loud and indignant. This is what happens when you treat family like strangers. Maria brought this on herself with her paranoid behavior. My mother cleared her throat. Micha, please, just come home for an hour and straighten this out. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. You know how you can be about details and documentation? Just explain to them that we had your permission. The request hung in the air between us like a live grenade. They wanted me to lie to police officers. They wanted me to claim I'd given permission for a party that happened while my daughter was fighting for her life. They wanted me to cover for their breathtaking selfishness by committing perjury. I never gave permission for a party in my home while Sophia was in the ICU. Maria, don't be difficult. You know what I mean. We had your key, we were family taking care of your house while you were away. It's not like we're strangers who broke in. You used my house to celebrate while my daughter was dying. She wasn't dying. Stop being so dramatic. She had a fever, kids get fevers all the time. You always blow everything out of proportion, just like after you came back from that war. Everything has to be a crisis with you. That war. Like my 2 tours in Afghanistan were some minor inconvenience rather than 18 months of combat operations. Like the improvised explosive device that killed my squad leader and left shrapnel in my left shoulder was just another Tuesday. Like the nightmares and hypervigilance and difficulty trusting people were character flaws, rather than normal responses to abnormal experiences. I'm not coming home to lie to the police for you. Fine, be stubborn. But don't blame us when this gets messy. You created this situation by being dramatic and calling the police on your own family. Luis is right. You never learned how to live in the real world after the military. You see enemies everywhere, even in people who love you. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in the sudden quiet of Sophia's room. Dr. Reeves had finished her examination and left while I was on the call, but David, the night nurse who'd stayed late to see Sophia's morning progress, was still adjusting her IV line. Everything okay? He asked, gently, not prying but clearly having overheard enough to be concerned. Family drama, I said, which was both completely true and utterly inadequate to describe what was happening. David nodded with the understanding of someone who'd probably seen every possible family dynamic play out in hospital rooms. Sometimes the people who should support us the most are the ones who make things the hardest. But you're doing exactly what Sophia needs you to do. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. His words carried the weight of professional experience, but they also reminded me of something crucial. I wasn't the problem here. My refusal to abandon Sophia wasn't dramatic or unreasonable. My documentation of their behavior wasn't paranoid. My unwillingness to lie to law enforcement wasn't stubborn. I was responding rationally to an irrational situation. My secure phone buzzed with a text message. Phase 2 complete. Documentation filed with appropriate authorities. Legal representation confirmed for 1,400 hours. Financial records indicate multiple actionable discrepancies. Recommend proceeding to Phase 3. I looked at Sophia, whose color was returning to normal as her oxygen levels stabilized. Her breathing was becoming less dependent on the ventilator with each passing hour. She was going to survive this crisis, but the battle was far from over. My family had escalated beyond cruel words and social media mockery. They'd involved law enforcement, tried to manipulate me into criminal activity, and continued to gaslight me about my mental state and judgment. But they'd also given me everything I needed to respond appropriately. Their own social media posts had documented their callous celebration during Sophia's medical emergency. Their phone calls had been recorded on my secure device. Their attempts to manipulate me into providing false statements to police had been captured in real time. They built the case against themselves while believing they were building a case against me. My phone rang again, this time showing Luis's contact information. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately played back the message on speaker, while Sophia slept peacefully beside me. "Maria, this is getting out of hand. The police are asking for financial records, receipts from the party, even phone records from last night. Carmen told them you've been acting erratic since your deployment, and Dad mentioned your PTSD diagnosis. We're trying to help you here, but you need to work with us. Come home and fix this mess before it ruins the whole family." They were using my service-related mental health treatment as evidence of instability. They were weaponizing my PTSD diagnosis, something I'd worked years to manage and overcome, as justification for their behavior. They were painting themselves as victims of my alleged psychological problems while positioning their celebration during Sophia's crisis as reasonable family behavior. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to my secure contact, along with screenshots of all their social media posts from the previous night. Every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every celebration of their party while my daughter fought for her life, documented and time-stamped and ready for appropriate use. Sophia stirred in her sleep, her small hand moving toward mine with the instinctive trust of a child who knew her mother would never leave her side. I took her fingers gently, careful not to disturb the pulse oximeter that was showing steady, strong vital signs. "Miss Sumplale," they thought my silence meant weakness. They thought my focus on Sophia meant vulnerability. They thought my military training made me unstable rather than strategic. They were about to learn the difference between a tactical retreat and a full assault. By noon, Sophia was breathing almost entirely on her own, the ventilator providing only minimal assistance as her lungs regained their strength. The transformation was remarkable. Her color had returned from the frightening gray pallor to her normal warm brown, and she'd even opened her eyes briefly when Dr. Reeves came for her midday assessment. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something approaching hope. That hope was interrupted by the arrival of 2 police officers at Sophia's room. Detective Angela Morrison and Officer James Park introduced themselves with the professional courtesy that immediately told me this wasn't a routine follow-up call. Detective Morrison was a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen enough family disputes to recognize when simple stories didn't add up. "Ms. Torres, we're following up on a complaint filed regarding your residence at 247 Maple Street. Your family members indicated you might be able to clarify some details about events that occurred there last evening." I gestured toward Sophia's bed, keeping my voice low to avoid disturbing her rest. "My daughter has been in critical condition for 4 days. I haven't left the hospital since Tuesday night when we arrived by ambulance." Detective Morrison made a note in her pad, her expression carefully neutral. "Your family members claim they had your permission to use your home for a gathering while you were here. Can you confirm or deny that claim?" "I never gave anyone permission to have a party in my home. I gave my sister a spare key years ago for genuine emergencies only." I pulled out my phone and showed them the screenshot I'd taken of Carmen's text. "This is the only communication I received about their plans." Officer Park read the message aloud. "Can't make it to the hospital. Having people over tonight, you understand." He looked up at me. "This doesn't explicitly ask for permission to use your residence." "No, it doesn't." And my response was that I couldn't leave Sophia because she was in critical condition. At no point did I authorize a party in my home. Detective Morrison continued making notes. "Your brother Luis mentioned that you've been experiencing some difficulty adjusting since your military service. He suggested that might be affecting your judgment about family situations." The familiar surge of anger rose in my chest. but years of military discipline had taught me to channel emotion into strategic thinking. They were using my service record and mental health treatment as weapons against my credibility, just as they'd done in their voicemails and texts. Detective, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an intelligence analyst. I received an honorable discharge and appropriate recognition for my service. I've also been open about receiving treatment for service-related PTSD through the VA, which is standard care for combat veterans. My mental health treatment doesn't invalidate my right to control access to my own property or make decisions about my daughter's medical care. Detective Morrison's expression shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of respect in her eyes. Thank you for your service, and for that clarification. Can you tell us about your relationship with your family members prior to this incident? This was the moment I'd been preparing for since making those calls on my secure phone. Detective, I need to provide you with some context that I believe is relevant to understanding this situation. I pulled out a folder I'd assembled during the long night hours, containing printed screenshots of social media posts, transcripts of voicemails, and a timeline I'd constructed using my intelligence analysis training. While my daughter was fighting for her life, my family documented their celebration on multiple social media platforms. They also left several voicemail messages that I believe demonstrate their attitude toward Sophia's medical emergency. Detective Morrison accepted the folder and began reviewing its contents while Officer Park moved closer to examine the documents. I watched their faces as they read through Carmen's Instagram stories, showing 20 people partying in my backyard, Luis's Facebook live stream celebrating family time, and my mother's posts about trusting God's plan while surrounded by wine glasses and laughter. These posts are time-stamped throughout the evening, Detective Morrison observed. Your daughter's medical records show she was in critical condition during these same hours. Yes, the medical staff can confirm that Sophia's oxygen saturation dropped to dangerous levels multiple times Tuesday night. She required emergency interventions while my family was posting videos of themselves celebrating in my home. Officer Park was reading through the voicemail transcripts, his expression growing increasingly serious. Ms. Torres, these messages contain some concerning language about your mental state and your assessment of your daughter's condition. My family has consistently portrayed my devotion to Sophia's care as evidence of psychological instability. They've suggested that my military service and PTSD treatment make me an unreliable judge of medical emergencies. However, Sophia's medical team can verify that her condition was indeed life-threatening, and that my advocacy for her care was appropriate and necessary. Detective Morrison closed the folder and looked directly at me. Ms. Torres, this appears to be a more complex situation than initially reported. Your family members described this as a misunderstanding about permission to use your home. But these documents suggest a pattern of dismissive behavior toward both your authority as a homeowner and your judgment as a parent. Detective, there's one more thing you should know. I pulled out my secure phone and accessed the recordings I'd made of their phone calls. I have recordings of conversations where my family members asked me to leave my critically ill daughter to handle their noise complaint, and where they requested that I provide false statements to law enforcement about having given them permission for their gathering. The 2 officers exchanged a meaningful look. Detective Morrison spoke carefully. Ms. Torres, if you have recordings of requests for false statements to law enforcement that could constitute attempted solicitation of perjury, would you be willing to provide those recordings as evidence? Absolutely. I want to be clear that I'm not seeking revenge against my family, but I need to protect my daughter and myself from ongoing manipulation and harassment. Their behavior last night crossed multiple lines, and their attempts to use my military service and mental health treatment to undermine my credibility represent a pattern I can't allow to continue. Officer Park reviewed his notes. Ms. Torres, based on the evidence you've provided, we'll be expanding our investigation beyond the initial complaint. The unauthorized use of your property, the attempted manipulation of law enforcement, and the documentation of their activities during your family emergency paint a very different picture than what was initially reported. Detective Morrison handed me her business card. We'll need you to come to the station when your daughter's condition allows us to provide a formal statement and submit these recordings as evidence. However, given the circumstances, we understand your priority is her medical care. Thank you, Detective. Sophia is expected to be moved out of intensive care tomorrow if her recovery continues at this rate. I'll be available for a formal statement once she's stable. After the officers left, I sat in the quiet of Sophia's room processing what had just occurred. My family's attempt to manipulate law enforcement had backfired spectacularly. Their own social media posts had provided irrefutable evidence of their callous behavior. Their recorded requests for me to lie to police had elevated their actions from family drama to potential criminal activity. My secure phone buzzed with an update from my base contact. Law enforcement contact successful. Financial investigation reveals unauthorized charges to joint accounts during the party. Legal team standing by for custody protection measures if needed. Recommend proceeding to the final documentation phase. Joint accounts. I'd forgotten about the credit cards that still listed Carmen and Luis as authorized users from years ago when I'd helped them through financial difficulties. If they'd used those cards to fund their party while knowing about Sophia's condition, that would constitute financial abuse in addition to everything else. Sophia's eyes opened fully for the first time in days, focusing on my face with the clarity I'd been desperate to see. Her voice was hoarse from the ventilator, but unmistakably her own. "Mama? Are you okay? You look tired." Even in her weakened state, recovering from a life-threatening illness, her first concern was for my well-being. The contrast between her innocent worry and my family's calculated cruelty was so stark, it took my breath away. "I'm perfect now that you're awake, baby. How do you feel?" "Thirsty, and my throat hurts, but better." She tried to sit up slightly, and I helped adjust her pillows. "Mama, were Abuela and Tio Luis here?" I thought I heard them, but everything was fuzzy. The question hit me like a physical blow. In her fevered, semi-conscious state, she'd been aware enough to expect her family's presence. She'd been listening for voices that never came, waiting for visits that never happened, hoping for support that was being given to a party instead. "No, sweetheart. They weren't here. But the doctors and nurses took really good care of you, and Mama never left your side." Oh. She processed this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who'd grown accustomed to disappointment from adults who should have been reliable. "That's okay. You were here. That's what matters." Her simple statement of loyalty, her automatic assumption that my presence was sufficient, even when everyone else had failed her, crystallized everything I'd been fighting for. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point. This was about protecting a child who deserved better than a family that celebrated while she suffered. My secure phone displayed one final message. All phases complete. Documentation filed. Legal protections in place. Standing by for implementation of consequences. I looked at my daughter, finally breathing freely, finally conscious and safe, and made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. They'd declared war on us when they chose celebration over compassion. Now they were going to learn what happened when you underestimated a combat veteran who was fighting for her child. The afternoon brought Dr. Reeves with the news I'd been praying for. Sophia was stable enough to be moved from the ICU to a regular pediatric room. As we made the transition, wheeling her bed through corridors that suddenly felt less like a war zone and more like a place of healing, I realized I hadn't told my family about her improvement. For the first time in days, I had genuinely good news to share, yet the thought of calling them felt hollow. Sophia's new room had windows that actually opened, letting in fresh air and natural light that made everything feel more hopeful. She was sitting up on her own now, though still connected to oxygen and IV fluids. Her appetite was returning. She'd managed half a cup of chicken broth and asked for her favorite book about the dragon who learned to be brave. "Mama, can I call Abuela and tell her I'm feeling better?" Sophia asked, as I helped her get comfortable in the new bed. The innocent question caught me off guard, reminding me that she had no idea about the events of the past few days beyond her own fight for recovery. "Let's focus on getting you stronger first, sweetheart. The doctors want to make sure you're completely better before we have too many visitors." She nodded, accepting my explanation with the trust that 8-year-olds place in their parents. But her question had crystallized something important. Whatever happened next, Sophia's relationship with her extended family would be forever changed. She deserved to understand why, when she was old enough to process it. My regular phone has been buzzing constantly since the police visit. 17 missed calls from Louise, 12 from Carmen, 8 from my mother. The voicemails were escalating in tone, from defensive to angry to desperate. I'd listened to the first few, then stopped when it became clear they were all variations of the same theme. This was somehow my fault for involving law enforcement in what should have been handled as a family matter. But it was the text message thread between Carmen and Luis that provided the most revealing insight into their mindset. Carmen had accidentally included me in a group text meant for Luis, my mother, and my father. The messages painted a picture of people who still didn't understand the gravity of what they'd done. Carmen: Maria is losing her mind over this police thing. She's making it sound like we committed some major crime instead of just having a family gathering. Luis: I told you she's been unstable since Afghanistan. This is exactly the kind of paranoid overreaction the VA warned us about when she came home. My mother: maybe we should get her back into therapy. This obsession with Sophia being sicker than she actually was is clearly trauma response. My father: the girl had a fever. Kids get fevers all the time. Maria turned it into a combat situation because that's how her brain works now. Luis: the cops are asking about financial stuff now. Did anyone use Maria's cards for the party supplies? Carmen: just the catering and the liquor. She always told us to use them for family emergencies. Luis: a party isn't an emergency, Carmen. Carmen: it was an emergency family gathering to support each other while Maria dealt with her crisis. Same thing. Reading their messages felt like conducting intelligence analysis on enemy communications. They genuinely believed their narrative, that Sophia's illness was minor, that my response was disproportionate, that their gathering was supportive rather than callous, that using my credit cards without permission during my daughter's medical emergency was justified as family assistance. More disturbing was their continued weaponization of my military service and mental health treatment. They'd constructed a storyline where my PTSD made me an unreliable narrator of my own life, where my combat experience was a liability rather than an asset, where my fierce protection of Sophia was pathology rather than appropriate maternal instinct. My secure phone rang with an incoming call from Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, my former commanding officer and current contact for veteran advocacy issues. Her voice carried the authority and warmth that had made her an exceptional leader during my service. Torres: I got your documentation package. This is a clusterfuck of epic proportions. Sarah had never been one to sugarcoat situations. Your family is using your service record and mental health treatment as weapons against you while you're dealing with a pediatric medical emergency? Yes, ma'am. They've positioned my PTSD diagnosis and combat experience as evidence that I can't accurately assess threats or medical situations. They're telling law enforcement that my judgment is compromised by military trauma. That's not just cruel, Torres, it's a dangerous precedent. If families can use veteran mental health treatment to override parental authority during medical crises, we've got a serious problem for all military parents. Sarah's voice carried the edge that appeared when she was preparing for battle. I'm activating some resources. You shouldn't have to fight this alone. I appreciate that, ma'am, but I need to handle this through proper legal channels. Sophia has to be my priority. Copy that. But Torres, you've got backup if you need it. The veteran community doesn't abandon our own, especially when they're protecting their kids. After ending the call, I found myself staring out Sophia's new window at the city skyline, processing the weight of what was happening. This had evolved beyond family drama into something that could affect how society viewed veteran parents, how medical professionals assessed family dynamics, how law enforcement handled domestic disputes involving military families. Sophia was napping peacefully when my phone rang with a call from Detective Morrison. Her tone was professional, but tinged with something that sounded like controlled anger. Ms. Torres, we've completed our preliminary investigation into the activities at your residence. I need to inform you that we've identified several potential criminal violations beyond the initial complaint. I stepped into the hallway to take the call without disturbing Sophia's rest. What kind of violations, Detective? Unauthorized use of financial accounts, falsification of emergency justification for property access, and attempted solicitation of false statements to law enforcement. Additionally, the social media documentation you provided shows a pattern of deliberate emotional distress infliction during a family medical emergency. The clinical language made their cruelty sound almost manageable, but the legal implications were becoming clear. What happens next? We're preparing to file formal charges. However, given the family relationships involved, the district attorney's office wants to offer your relatives an opportunity to make full restitution and engage in court-mandated family counseling before proceeding with prosecution. Detective, I need to be clear about something. My primary concern is protecting my daughter from future manipulation and ensuring that my parental authority isn't undermined by false claims about my mental health. If restitution and counseling can accomplish that, I'm open to discussing alternatives to prosecution. Understood. We'll be contacting your family members today to present their options. Ms. Torres, I want you to know that your documentation and evidence collection were exemplary. Your military training clearly served you well in building this case. After the call ended, I returned to Sophia's room to find her awake and looking much more like herself. The color had fully returned to her cheeks and she was sitting up without assistance for the first time since Tuesday. Mama, I heard you talking about family counseling. Are we in trouble? Her perceptive question reminded me that children absorb much more than adults realize, even during medical crises. She deserved age-appropriate honesty about what was happening. No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. Sometimes families have disagreements about important things, and sometimes those disagreements need help from other people to get resolved. But you and I are okay, and that's what matters most. Are Abuela and Tio Luis mad at us? The innocent way she phrased it, mad at us, as if we were a team facing external challenges together, nearly broke my heart. They made some choices that weren't very kind while you were sick. But that's not your fault, and it's not something you need to worry about. Your job is just to get completely better. She nodded seriously, processing this information with the resilience that had carried her through 4 days of fighting for her life. Mama, when I was really sick, did they come to see me? The direct question demanded a direct answer. No, baby, they didn't come to the hospital. But you stayed the whole time? Every single minute. I would never leave you when you needed me. I know. Her simple statement of absolute trust in my reliability hit me with the force of revelation. This was what I was fighting for, not revenge against my family, but preservation of the bond that had sustained us both through this crisis. My secure phone buzzed with a final message from my base contact. All documentation forwarded to appropriate authorities. Financial protections implemented. Legal representation confirmed. Family members will receive official notification of consequences within 24 hours. Mission complete. I looked at Sophia, finally safe and recovering, and realized that the real mission was just beginning. Protecting her from future manipulation, establishing clear boundaries with family members who'd weaponized my military service, and ensuring that no other veteran parent would face what we'd endured. These were the battles that mattered now. The war was far from over, but we'd survived the first assault. And sometimes, survival is the foundation for everything that comes next. Thursday morning brought Sophia's first real breakfast since the crisis began. Scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice that she managed to finish completely. Watching her eat normal food, seeing her animated conversation about wanting to go home to see her stuffed animals, felt like witnessing a miracle. Dr. Reeves estimated she could be discharged by Saturday if her recovery continued at this pace. The peaceful morning was shattered by the arrival of my entire family in Sophia's hospital room. They hadn't called ahead, hadn't asked permission, hadn't even checked with the nursing staff about visiting hours. They simply appeared like a storm front, filling the space with tension and barely contained hostility. Carmen entered first, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, clutching a small bouquet of flowers that looked hastily purchased from the hospital gift shop. Behind her came Luis with his jaw set in the stubborn expression I remembered from childhood arguments, followed by my parents wearing matching expressions of wounded dignity. Sophia, mija, we came as soon as we could, my mother announced, rushing toward the bed with theatrical concern. Abuela was so worried about you. Sophia shrank back against her pillows, instinctively sensing the adult's tension, even if she couldn't understand its source. Her hand found mine under the hospital blanket, squeezing tightly in a silent request for protection. You couldn't come for 4 days while she was fighting for her life, but now that she's recovering, you rush over? I kept my voice level, mindful of Sophia's presence, but the edge was unmistakable. Carmen's face crumpled as if I'd slapped her. Maria, we tried to be supportive in our own way. We were giving you space to handle the medical situation, while we kept everyone's spirits up. We were being positive instead of falling apart like you wanted us to. The revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. They'd reframed their party as emotional support, their absence as respect for my space, their cruelty as positivity. Luis stepped forward, positioning himself as the reasonable mediator he'd always fancied himself to be. Maria, we need to talk about this police situation. You've blown everything way out of proportion, and now the whole family is suffering because you can't tell the difference between a family gathering and some kind of criminal conspiracy. The police investigation isn't about a family gathering, Luis. It's about using my home and my credit cards without permission, while my daughter was in intensive care, then asking me to lie to law enforcement about giving you authorization. My father cleared his throat, assuming the patriarchal authority that had dominated family dynamics for decades. Mija, you're seeing enemies where there are none. This is exactly what the VA doctors warned us about when you came home from Afghanistan. Your military experience makes you suspicious of normal family behavior. Sophia's grip on my hand tightened, and I realized she was listening to every word, absorbing the implication that my military service made me mentally unreliable. At 8 years old, she was learning that adults could weaponize someone's sacrifice and service as evidence of instability. Dad, my military experience taught me to document everything, assess threats accurately, and protect what matters most. That's exactly what I've done throughout this situation. Carmen pulled out her phone, scrolling to something she'd obviously prepared for this confrontation. Maria, look at this objectively. We posted happy family photos while you were dealing with a stressful medical situation. We used your house for a family gathering like we've done dozens of times before. We asked you to clarify the situation with the police when there was a misunderstanding. None of that is criminal behavior. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I could almost see how an outside observer might find their version plausible. They'd perfected the art of reframing cruelty as concern, neglect as respect, manipulation as family loyalty. Carmen, show Sophia the videos you posted on Instagram Tuesday night. Let her see how you celebrated while she was on a ventilator fighting for her life. Maria, don't drag Sophia into adult problems, my mother interjected sharply. She doesn't need to hear about family disagreements. She doesn't need to hear that her extended family partied while she was dying. She doesn't need to know that they used her grandmother's PTSD diagnosis to justify their absence. You're right. She deserves better than that truth. Sophia's voice cut through the adult tension with startling clarity. Mama, what's PTSD? The innocent question created a moment of absolute silence in the room. Everyone froze, realizing that our family dysfunction was playing out in front of a child who was still recovering from a life-threatening illness. I looked down at my daughter, whose dark eyes were fixed on my face with the trust that had sustained us both through this nightmare. PTSD is something that can happen to people who go through very scary situations, like soldiers in war. It means their brains stay alert for danger, even when they're safe at home. Some people think it makes soldiers unreliable, but really it just means they're very good at protecting the people they love. Like how you protected me when I was sick. Exactly like that, sweetheart. Luis shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that Sophia's simple question had exposed the cruelty of using my mental health treatment as a weapon against my credibility. Carmen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the misunderstood family member. My phone rang with an incoming call from Detective Morrison. I answered immediately, putting it on speaker so my family could hear both sides of the conversation. Ms. Torres, I'm calling to update you on our investigation. We've completed our review of the financial records and social media evidence. We're prepared to move forward with formal charges unless your family members accept the restitution and counseling agreement we discussed. Carmen's face went white. Luis started to speak, but I held up a hand to silence him. Detective, My family is here now. Would you mind explaining to them directly what charges they're facing? Certainly. The potential charges include unauthorized use of financial accounts, unlawful entry to private property, attempted solicitation of false statements to law enforcement, and aggravated harassment during a family medical emergency. The total financial damages exceed $3,000 when including catering, alcohol, and cleanup costs charged to Ms. Torres's accounts without authorization. The room was completely silent except for the steady beeping of Sophia's monitors. My family's faces showed a progression from disbelief to fear to anger as the legal reality penetrated their narrative of victimization. However, Detective Morrison continued, given the family relationships involved, the district attorney is willing to offer an alternative resolution: full financial restitution, completion of court-mandated family counseling, and a formal restraining order protecting Ms. Torres's parental authority from future interference. What does that mean exactly? Luis asked, his voice strained. It means any future attempts to undermine Ms. Torres's parental decisions, use her military service or mental health treatment against her credibility, or access her property without explicit permission will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. It also means acknowledgement that your behavior during your niece's medical emergency was inappropriate and harmful. Carmen burst into tears, but they seemed more like tears of frustration than genuine remorse. This is insane. We're being treated like criminals for having a family gathering. You're being treated like people who violated multiple laws while an 8-year-old child fought for her life, Detective Morrison responded calmly. The choice is yours. Accept responsibility and make amends, or face prosecution. You have 24 hours to decide. After the call ended, my family stood in stunned silence. The legal consequences they'd dismissed as impossible were suddenly very real, very immediate, and very public. Their narrative of being persecuted by my alleged instability had collapsed under the weight of documented evidence and professional legal assessment. My father was the first to speak, his voice carrying the defeated tone of someone whose authority had been definitively challenged. Maria, surely we can work this out as a family without involving courts and lawyers. Dad, we had 4 days to work this out as a family. Instead, you chose to party in my house, mock my military service, use my credit cards without permission, and then ask me to lie to the police. The time for family solutions ended when you made those choices. Sophia had been listening to everything, with the focused attention that children bring to adult conversations that affect their world. Mama, she said quietly, are they going to say they're sorry for not visiting me when I was sick? The simple question from my 8-year-old daughter cut through all the legal complications and adult justifications to the heart of what mattered. She wasn't asking about restitution, or restraining orders, or court-mandated counseling. She was asking whether the people who claimed to love her would acknowledge that they'd failed her when she needed them most. Carmen knelt beside Sophia's bed, fresh tears streaming down her face. But when she opened her mouth to speak, the words that came out revealed everything about her priorities. Sophia, sweetheart, Tia Carmen was trying to keep everyone's spirits up while your mama handled the scary hospital stuff. Sometimes adults have to make hard choices about how to help. Even in her apology, she couldn't admit they'd been wrong. Even facing criminal charges, she was still reframing their abandonment as a form of support. Even looking at my daughter's innocent face, she couldn't find the courage to tell the simple truth. They had failed her, and they were sorry. I looked at Sophia, then at my family, and realized that this moment would define our relationships for years to come. They could choose accountability and rebuilding, or they could choose pride and permanent estrangement. But the choice was entirely theirs to make. The 24 hours that followed, Detective Morrison's ultimatum passed like a slow-motion countdown to an explosion. My family left Sophia's hospital room in stunned silence after Carmen's non-apology, but their absence didn't bring peace. Instead, it brought a flurry of text messages, voicemails, and third-party interventions that revealed the depth of their desperation and their continued inability to accept responsibility. Sophia had noticed the tension immediately after they left. Mama, why did Tia Carmen sound like she was lying when she said sorry? Her 8-year-old instincts for detecting adult dishonesty were sharper than I'd given her credit for. Sometimes people say words they think others want to hear instead of saying what they really mean in their hearts, I explained, helping her adjust her pillows so she could sit up more comfortably. Real apologies come from understanding you did something wrong and wanting to make it right. So she wasn't really sorry? I don't think she understands yet what she should be sorry for. Sophia considered this with the serious expression she wore when processing complex adult concepts. That's sad for her, she concluded, displaying the kind of emotional wisdom that constantly amazed me. By Friday morning, the indirect pressure campaign had begun in earnest. My tia Rosa called, claiming she'd heard there was some kind of misunderstanding between me and the family, offering to mediate what she described as a, quote, communication problem. When I explained that there was no misunderstanding, just documented criminal behavior and attempts to gaslight me about my mental health, she quickly ended the call. Father Miguel from our old parish reached out next, explaining that my mother had contacted him about a family crisis and asking if I'd be open to pastoral counseling. The implication was clear. They were positioning this as a spiritual failing on my part, a lack of forgiveness and Christian charity, rather than a legitimate response to harmful behavior. Father, I appreciate your concern, but this isn't about forgiveness, I told him. This is about protecting my daughter from family members who've demonstrated they'll weaponize my military service and mental health treatment when it's convenient for them. I can forgive them without enabling future abuse. The most manipulative attempt came from my cousin Elena, who'd always been Carmen's closest ally in family politics. She showed up at the hospital unannounced Friday afternoon, carrying a large teddy bear for Sophia and wearing the expression of someone on a mission. Maria, we need to talk, she announced, settling into the visitor's chair like she planned to stay for hours. This whole situation has gotten completely out of hand. Do you really want to destroy the family over one night of poor judgment? Sophia perked up at the sight of the teddy bear, which Elena presented with theatrical generosity. This is from all of us, sweetheart. Everyone has been so worried about you. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Everyone had been so worried that they'd partied for 8 hours while she was on life support, but apparently buying a $20 teddy bear made up for their absence during her medical crisis. Elena, where was all this worry when Sophia was in the ICU for 4 days? Maria, you have to understand, not everyone handles medical emergencies the same way. Some people fall apart. Some people try to stay positive and keep life normal. Carmen and Luis were trying to maintain family stability while you focused on Sophia's care. The revisionist history was becoming more elaborate with each retelling. Now their party wasn't just emotional support. It was maintaining family stability. Their absence wasn't neglect. It was division of labor. Their cruelty wasn't callousness. It was different coping styles. Elena, they used my credit cards without permission to fund their party. They asked me to lie to police about giving them authorization. They used my PTSD diagnosis to justify their behavior to law enforcement. Those aren't coping strategies, they're criminal acts. You're being so rigid about this, so black and white. Yes, maybe they made some mistakes, but does that really deserve police involvement and lawyers and all this drama? Can't you just accept their apology and move on? Sophia had been quietly listening while cuddling her new teddy bear, but Elena's words seemed to trigger something in her memory. Tia Elena, what apology? Tia Carmen didn't really say sorry yesterday. She said she was trying to help, but she didn't say sorry for not visiting me when I was sick. Elena's face flushed, as she realized an 8-year-old had just exposed the fundamental flaw in the family's reconciliation strategy. They wanted forgiveness without acknowledgement, peace without accountability, relationship restoration without behavioral change. Sophia, sweetheart, sometimes adults express sorry in different ways. The important thing is that everyone loves you and wants the family to be together again. But love means visiting people when they're sick, right? And love means not lying to police officers? The innocent questions from my daughter were dismantling Elena's manipulation more effectively than any legal argument could have. Sophia understood intuitively what the adults were working desperately to obscure, that actions reveal character more clearly than words, and that real love requires showing up when it's difficult. Elena abandoned her diplomatic approach and shifted to direct pressure. Maria, you're traumatizing this child by dragging her into adult conflicts. She doesn't need to know about police investigations and legal consequences. She just wants her family to love each other. Elena, Sophia doesn't know about police investigations because I've protected her from those details. What she knows is that her family didn't visit her when she was fighting for her life, and that they're now trying to manipulate both of us into pretending that behavior was acceptable. You're being paranoid again. This is exactly what everyone has been worried about since you came back from Afghanistan. You see malicious intent in normal family behavior. You turn minor disagreements into combat situations. There it was again, the weaponization of my military service. The suggestion that my combat experience made me an unreliable interpreter of family dynamics. But this time, Sophia was hearing it directly, learning that adults in her family believed her mother's war service was a character flaw rather than a sacrifice. Tia Elena, Sophia said quietly, my mama protected people in the war, right? That's what soldiers do? Well, yes, sweetheart, but… And she protected me when I was sick by staying with me every day? Yes, but… So why do you think protecting people is bad? Elena stared at my 8-year-old daughter, clearly unprepared for such direct logic. Sophia had effortlessly connected the dots that the adults were working to keep separate. That protection was my fundamental nature, whether in Afghanistan or in a hospital room, and that my vigilance had saved lives in both contexts. My secure phone buzzed with a text from Lieutenant Colonel Martinez. Legal team standing by. Documentation package forwarded to family court for protection order filing. Your back is covered, Torres. Elena's visit ended abruptly when Dr. Reeves arrived for Sophia's afternoon assessment. As she gathered her purse and prepared to leave, Elena made one final attempt at manipulation. Maria, just remember that family is forever. Legal battles end, but you'll still be related to these people for the rest of Sophia's life. Do you really want her growing up knowing that her mother chose lawyers over loving relatives? Sophia looked up from her teddy bear with a serious expression that meant she was about to say something important. Mama chose me over people who didn't choose me. That's not bad. That's what mamas are supposed to do. After Elena left, Dr. Reeves completed her examination and delivered the news I'd been hoping for. Sophia was cleared for discharge Saturday morning. Her recovery had been remarkable, and while she'd need follow-up care and monitoring, the crisis was definitively over. She's resilient, Dr. Reeves observed, making notes in Sophia's chart. But children who experience medical trauma with strong parental advocacy tend to recover both physically and emotionally, much better than those who face it alone. Your consistency and presence made a significant difference in her outcome. That evening, as Sophia slept peacefully in her hospital bed for what would be the last time, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, Luis's voice came through, strained and desperate, in a way I'd never heard before. Maria, we've hired a lawyer. He says the police case against us is solid, but he thinks we can fight the restraining order part. He says using someone's military service against them in court can backfire, especially with a sympathetic veteran judge. Luis, are you calling to threaten me with legal action? I'm calling to give you one last chance to be reasonable. Accept our apology, drop the charges, and let's move forward as a family. If you force this into court, everyone's dirty laundry is going to come out. Your PTSD episodes, your medication changes, your difficulty adjusting after deployment, all of it becomes public record. The threat was clear. Cooperate with their version of reconciliation, or they'd weaponize my mental health treatment in open court. They were prepared to destroy my reputation and potentially damage my custody rights to avoid accountability for their behavior. Luis, you just made another threatening phone call that I've recorded. Your lawyer might want to advise you about the legal consequences of intimidating witnesses in an ongoing criminal investigation. The silence that followed told me he'd just realized he'd potentially committed another crime while trying to avoid consequences for the first set of crimes. But more importantly, his call had clarified something crucial. They weren't sorry, they weren't ready to change, and they were prepared to escalate their attacks on my credibility rather than accept responsibility. The choice Detective Morrison had offered them was about to expire, and based on Luis's call, I already knew what their decision would be. They were choosing pride over accountability, legal battle over family healing, and continued attacks on my military service over simple acknowledgement of their failures. Saturday morning couldn't come soon enough. Sophia and I were going home, but we were going home to a very different life than the one we'd left 4 days earlier. The war they declared was far from over, but at least now the battle lines were clearly drawn. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. Sophia was dressed in her own clothes for the first time in 5 days. A purple sweater with a unicorn on the front, and jeans that were slightly loose from the weight she'd lost during her illness. She clutched her new teddy bear with one arm and held my hand with the other as we walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit. "Mama, is our house going to look different?" she asked as we waited for the discharge paperwork to be finalized. It was a perceptive question from someone who understood that major events change everything, even familiar spaces. "It might feel different for a little while," I admitted, "but your room is exactly the same, and all your stuffed animals are waiting for you." The drive home was quiet, Sophia dozing in her car seat while I processed the weight of returning to a house that had been violated by people I'd trusted. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed immediately that the spare key was no longer in its hiding place under the ceramic frog by the front door. My family had apparently returned it sometime during the past few days, though whether voluntarily or under police instruction, I didn't know. Inside, the evidence of Tuesday night's party was completely gone. Someone had cleaned thoroughly. The floors were spotless, the furniture was back in place, and there was even a vase of fresh flowers on the kitchen counter with a note that read, "Sorry for the misunderstanding. Love, family." The clinical sanitization of their violation somehow felt worse than if they'd left the mess for me to discover. They'd erased the physical evidence while continuing to minimize the emotional damage, leaving behind a performative gesture that demonstrated they still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. Sophia explored the house with the careful attention of someone returning to familiar territory after trauma. She checked her room, her toys, her books, making sure everything was where she'd left it. In her bedroom, she discovered a large gift bag filled with new toys and clothes, clearly expensive purchases intended to substitute for presents and accountability. "Did they buy me presents because they feel bad about not visiting me?" she asked, examining a new art set with the practical wisdom that continually surprised me. "Probably. Sometimes people try to fix hurt feelings with gifts instead of fixing the behavior that caused the hurt feelings. That doesn't really work, does it?" "No, sweetheart. It doesn't." Sunday morning brought the deadline for my family's decision about Detective Morrison's offer. I'd heard nothing from them since Luis's threatening phone call, which had been their final attempt to manipulate me into dropping the charges. Based on their silence, I assumed they'd chosen to fight rather than accept responsibility. I was proved correct when Detective Morrison called at exactly 9 a.m. "Ms. Torres, your family members have declined the restitution and counseling agreement. Their attorney contacted our office Friday evening to inform us they'll be fighting all charges. We'll be proceeding with formal prosecution. What's the timeline for that process?" "Arraignments are scheduled for next week. Given the evidence we have, including the recorded phone calls and financial documentation, the district attorney is confident about conviction on multiple counts. However, I should warn you that their lawyer has indicated they plan to challenge your credibility by questioning your mental health status." I'd been expecting this strategy since Luis's threatening call, but hearing it confirmed still sent a chill through me. They were prepared to weaponize my PTSD diagnosis and military service in open court, potentially damaging my reputation and parental credibility to avoid accountability for their actions. "Detective, I want to proceed regardless of their strategy. Sophia deserves to see that actions have consequences, and other military families deserve to know that veteran mental health treatment can't be used to override parental authority." "Understood. Ms. Torres, I want you to know that the prosecutor assigned to this case is a veteran herself. She's familiar with the tactics of using military mental health treatment as a weapon, and she's prepared to counter them effectively." After ending the call, I found Sophia in the living room arranging her stuffed animals in a circle, conducting what appeared to be a serious meeting between a unicorn, a dragon, and several bears. The scene was so normal, so peacefully domestic, that it highlighted the absurdity of my family's continued attacks on my mental health and judgment. "What are your animals discussing?" I asked, settling onto the floor beside her. "They're trying to figure out why some grown-ups say mean things about other grown-ups instead of just saying sorry when they make mistakes," Sophia explained seriously. "The dragon thinks it's because saying sorry is scary, but the unicorn thinks it's because some people don't really understand what they did wrong." Her 8-year-old analysis of adult behavior was more insightful than anything my family's lawyer would present in court. She understood intuitively that accountability requires both acknowledgement and understanding, not just legal maneuvering and character assassination. Monday brought the first concrete consequence of my family's decision to fight. A process server arrived at our door with legal documents. Not only were they contesting the criminal charges, but they'd filed a countersuit claiming emotional distress, defamation, and false accusation. They were seeking financial damages for the trauma of being investigated by police. The audacity was breathtaking. They'd caused our trauma by abandoning Sophia during her medical crisis, then compounded it by using my military service against me. And now they were claiming to be the real victims deserving of compensation. But reading through their legal filing revealed something important. Their entire defense strategy was built on portraying me as an unstable veteran whose combat experience made me paranoid, vindictive, and unable to distinguish between normal family behavior and malicious attacks. They were betting everything on the hope that anti-veteran bias would override the documented evidence of their actions. Their lawyer had crafted a narrative where my PTSD diagnosis explained away every piece of evidence I'd collected. My documentation of their social media posts was obsessive surveillance behavior typical of combat veterans. My recordings of their phone calls were paranoid evidence gathering consistent with military training. My refusal to leave Sophia's bedside was hypervigilant attachment stemming from trauma response. They'd turned my greatest strengths, my attention to detail, my strategic thinking, my fierce protection of my daughter, into symptoms of mental illness. They'd weaponized my service record so thoroughly that they were arguing my military training itself made me an unreliable witness to my own life. Sophia found me reading the legal documents at the kitchen table, my jaw clenched with the kind of anger that comes from being systematically gaslighted by people who claim to love you. "Mama, you look like you did when the mean nurse wouldn't let me have ice chips," she observed, climbing into the chair beside me. "I'm reading some papers that say some not very nice things about Mama's brain," I explained, choosing honesty over protection. "Some people are trying to say that because Mama was a soldier, she can't think clearly about family problems." Sophia considered this with the seriousness she brought to all discussions about fairness and truth. "But being a soldier is good, right? Soldiers protect people?" "Yes, sweetheart. Being a soldier means you learn how to stay calm in scary situations, how to gather information carefully, and how to protect the people you love. All of those things helped me take care of you when you were sick. So the people who say soldier brains don't work right are wrong? They're very wrong. And we're going to prove it." Tuesday morning brought a call from Lieutenant Colonel Martinez with news that made everything feel less overwhelming. "Torres, I've been making some calls about your situation. You're not fighting this alone anymore." "Ma'am? The Veterans Legal Defense Foundation has taken an interest in your case. They're concerned about the precedent of using military mental health treatment to undermine veteran parents during family crises. They want to provide additional legal support. I already have representation through the district attorney's office. This is bigger than your criminal case, Torres. This is about whether families can weaponize veteran mental health treatment to override parental authority. If your family succeeds with this strategy, it opens the door for every vindictive relative to claim veteran parents are unstable whenever they make unpopular decisions about their children." The weight of what she was saying settled over me like armor. This wasn't just about protecting Sophia and me anymore. It was about protecting every military parent from having their service record used against them by manipulative family members. What kind of support are they offering? Expert witnesses, media strategy, additional legal research, and a network of veteran families who faced similar challenges. You've got an entire community ready to stand with you. That evening, as Sophia and I read bedtime stories in the safety of our own home, I realized that my family's escalation had given me something unexpected. Clarity about what I was fighting for and who would stand with me in that fight. They thought isolating me from family support would weaken my position, but they'd actually connected me to a much larger community of people who understood that service was strength, not weakness. Their attempts to weaponize my military experience had backfired spectacularly, turning my case into a cause that resonated far beyond our personal conflict. The battle lines were drawn, the resources were mobilized, and the real war was about to begin. The courtroom felt different from what I'd expected. Smaller, more sterile, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly pale. Sophia sat in the first row behind me, accompanied by Jennifer, the ICU nurse who'd volunteered to supervise her during the proceedings. I'd tried to arrange childcare to spare her from witnessing this confrontation, but Sophia had quietly insisted she wanted to be there. "I want to see what happens when people have to tell the truth," she'd said with the matter-of-fact determination that reminded me so much of myself at her age. The prosecution table was occupied by Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen, a Marine Corps veteran whose crisp bearing and methodical preparation inspired confidence. She'd spent hours preparing me for the character assassination that was coming, helping me understand how my family's legal team would try to twist my military service into evidence of instability. Across the aisle, my family sat behind their attorney like a portrait of wounded dignity. Carmen wore a conservative navy dress and clutched a tissue box, playing the role of the grieving family member traumatized by my alleged persecution. Luis had his jaw set in the stubborn expression that meant he still believed he was the victim in this situation. My parents flanked them, wearing matching expressions of disappointment that suggested they were more upset about the public embarrassment than any reflection on their behavior. Their attorney, Marcus Webb, was a polished man in his 50s who specialized in defending white-collar crimes by attacking the credibility of those who reported them. He'd built his reputation on portraying witnesses as unstable, vindictive, or mentally compromised, and he approached my case with the confidence of someone who believed veteran PTSD would be an easy target. Judge Patricia Winters called the court to order with the authoritative voice of someone who'd seen every possible variation of family dysfunction. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who wouldn't tolerate theatrical manipulation. Ada Chen began with a methodical presentation of evidence that built the case like constructing a military briefing. She walked the court through the timeline of Sophia's medical crisis, displaying the hospital records that showed the severity of her condition alongside the social media posts documenting my family's party. The contrast was devastating. Time-stamped evidence of a child fighting for her life while her extended family celebrated in her mother's home. "Your Honor, this case demonstrates a pattern of emotional abuse and financial exploitation during a family medical emergency," Chen stated, clicking through photographs of my ransacked credit card statements. "The defendants used the plaintiff's absence during her daughter's life-threatening illness to access her property without permission, charged thousands of dollars to her accounts without authorization, and then attempted to manipulate law enforcement by requesting false statements about their activities. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew Webb's counterattack would focus entirely on my mental state, rather than addressing the documented facts. He stood for his opening statement with the theatrical confidence of someone preparing to perform a character assassination. "Your Honor, this case is not about property access or family gatherings. This case is about a troubled veteran whose military-induced paranoia has led her to weaponize the legal system against her own family members," Webb began, his voice carrying the sympathetic tone of someone concerned about mental health stigma while actively perpetuating it. "Ms. Torres suffers from documented PTSD stemming from combat deployment. Her medical records show ongoing treatment for hypervigilance, paranoid ideation, and difficulty maintaining normal family relationships since returning from Afghanistan. What we see here is not criminal behavior by loving family members, but the tragic consequences of untreated military trauma manifesting as persecution delusions." Sophia's small hand found mine from the bench behind me, squeezing gently as she watched adults argue about whether her mother's war service made her crazy. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were debating my mental fitness in front of the child whose life I'd fought to save while they partied. Webb continued his assault with surgical precision. Ms. Torres's obsessive documentation of normal family communications, her secretive recording of phone conversations, her paranoid interpretation of supportive family behavior. All of these behaviors are consistent with combat-related hypervigilance that has not been adequately addressed through treatment. He pulled out a thick folder of medical records that my family had somehow obtained, presumably through discovery requests that violated my privacy in service of their defense. "The evidence will show that Ms. Torres has a documented history of seeing threats where none exist, of interpreting family concerns about her mental health as personal attacks, and of using her military training to build cases against imaginary enemies. The attack was even more vicious than I'd anticipated. He wasn't just questioning my mental health. He was arguing that my entire personality, my protective instincts, my attention to detail, my strategic thinking, were all symptoms of untreated psychological damage, rather than strengths that had served me well in both military and civilian life. Ada Chen's first witness was Dr. Reeves, Sophia's physician, who testified about the severity of my daughter's condition and the appropriateness of my advocacy throughout her treatment. Her testimony was clinical, professional, and devastating to any suggestion that I'd overreacted to a minor childhood illness. Sophia Torres was in respiratory failure when she arrived at our facility, Dr. Reeves explained to the court. Without immediate intervention and the kind of consistent parental advocacy Ms. Torres provided, the outcome could have been very different. Her mother's vigilance and refusal to leave her bedside were not only appropriate, but potentially life-saving. Webb's cross-examination of Dr. Reeves revealed his strategy with crystalline clarity. Doctor, in your experience, do parents with military backgrounds sometimes have difficulty assessing the actual severity of medical situations? Do they sometimes see crises where medical professionals would see routine treatment? Objection, Your Honor. The question assumes facts not in evidence and asks for speculation about veteran parents generally, Chen interjected. Sustained, Judge Winters ruled, but Webb had planted the seed he wanted. The suggestion that veteran parents were inherently unreliable judges of their children's medical needs. The prosecution's second witness was Detective Morrison, who walked the court through the evidence collection process and the criminal violations that had been documented. Her testimony was methodical and devastating, particularly when she read aloud from the recorded phone calls where my family had requested false statements to law enforcement. Webb's cross-examination of Detective Morrison focused entirely on challenging the reliability of the source, rather than disputing the content of the evidence. Detective, when conducting this investigation, did you take into account Ms. Torres's documented mental health history? Did you consider that someone with combat-related PTSD might interpret normal family communications as threatening? Sir, my investigation focused on documented criminal violations, not psychological evaluations. The evidence speaks for itself regardless of anyone's mental health status. Morrison replied with the steady professionalism that had impressed me throughout this process. But Webb pressed forward with his character assassination. Detective, are you trained to recognize when apparent victims might actually be individuals whose mental health conditions lead them to perceive persecution where none exists? Judge Winters intervened before Morrison could answer. Mr. Webb, unless you have evidence that Ms. Torres's mental health treatment is directly relevant to the documented criminal violations, I'm going to ask you to focus on the actual charges rather than engaging in character assassination. The judge's intervention felt like a small victory. But I knew Webb was just getting started. His real assault would come when I took the stand, when he could directly attack my credibility, my judgment, and my fitness as both a witness and a mother. Sophia had been watching everything with the focused attention she brought to school lessons, absorbing the adult dynamics and legal procedures with obvious interest. During a brief recess, she approached me with a question that cut straight to the heart of what was happening. Mama, why is that man trying to make people think soldiers' brains are broken? Her 8-year-old summary of Webb's defense strategy was more accurate than anything the legal experts had prepared me for. He wasn't just questioning my mental health. He was arguing that military service itself created unreliable witnesses, unstable parents, and paranoid citizens who couldn't be trusted to interpret reality correctly. Because he thinks it's easier to attack Mama's brain than to explain why they had a party while you were sick, I told her honestly. That's not fair. No, sweetheart. It's not fair. But sometimes when people do wrong things, they try to make the person who caught them look bad instead of admitting they made mistakes. As court reconvened for the afternoon session, I realized that Sophia was witnessing something that would shape her understanding of justice, accountability, and the cost of standing up for what's right. Whatever happened next, she was learning that some battles were worth fighting regardless of how much they hurt, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who fight the hardest to avoid taking responsibility for the pain they've caused. The real test was about to begin, and everything depended on whether 12 strangers could see past the stigma surrounding veteran mental health to recognize the truth that my 8-year-old daughter understood instinctively, that protecting the people you love is never a sign of mental illness, regardless of where you learned how to do it. When ADHN called my name to the witness stand, the courtroom felt like it held its breath. Every step toward the front of the room carried the weight of not just my family's future, but potentially the future of every veteran parent who might face similar attacks on their credibility. Sophia's eyes followed me as I walked past her, and she gave me a tiny thumbs up that steadied my nerves more than any legal preparation could have. The oath felt heavier than usual. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Because I knew that everything I'd fought for depended on my ability to present that truth clearly and withstand the assault that was coming. Ada Chen began with gentle questions that established the timeline of Sophia's illness and my response to it. I testified about the frantic ambulance ride, the terrifying hours in the ICU, the steady improvement that had led to her recovery. The facts were straightforward, but I could feel Webb studying me like a predator waiting for weakness. "Ms. Torres, during your daughter's hospitalization, did you receive any support from your extended family?" Chen asked, guiding me toward the heart of the case. "No. For 4 days, while Sophia was in critical condition, none of them visited the hospital, called to check on her condition, or offered any kind of assistance. Instead, what were they doing? They were using my house to host a party that they documented extensively on social media. They charged catering, alcohol, and entertainment to my credit cards without permission. When police responded to noise complaints, they asked me to leave Sophia's bedside to handle the situation and later requested that I provide false statements about having given them authorization. Chen walked me through the evidence methodically: the social media posts, the credit card charges, the recorded phone calls. Each piece of documentation built a clear picture of calculated exploitation during a family medical emergency. "Ms. Torres, how did you have the foresight to document these communications so thoroughly?" This was the opening Chen had prepared for, the chance to reframe my military training as an asset rather than a liability. My military intelligence background taught me to document everything, assess situations objectively, and gather evidence systematically. Those skills served me well during Sophia's crisis, both in advocating for her medical care and in protecting us from manipulation. In your opinion, did your military training help or hinder your ability to handle your daughter's medical emergency? It absolutely helped. My ability to stay calm under pressure, communicate effectively with medical staff, and maintain detailed records of Sophia's condition were all skills I developed during my service. Without that training, I might have panicked or missed important information about her care. Chen concluded her direct examination by asking me to describe the impact of my family's behavior on both Sophia and myself. I kept my voice steady as I explained how their abandonment during her illness had taught my 8-year-old daughter that she couldn't count on family support during crises, and how their weaponization of my military service had forced me to defend my fitness as a parent. Then Webb stood for cross-examination and the real battle began. "Ms. Torres, you've been diagnosed with PTSD related to your military service, correct?" His first question was designed to establish the foundation for everything that would follow. "Yes, I received appropriate treatment through the VA for service-related PTSD, which is standard care for combat veterans. And this diagnosis includes symptoms of hypervigilance, paranoid ideation, and difficulty trusting others, doesn't it?" Ada Chen objected before I could answer. "Your Honor, Mr. Webb is asking the witness to provide medical interpretations outside her expertise." Sustained. "Mr. Webb, please focus on facts rather than diagnostic interpretations." Webb adjusted his approach, but maintained his assault. "Ms. Torres, since returning from Afghanistan, have you ever been prescribed medication for anxiety, depression, or sleep disorders?" "I've received standard medical care through the VA, yes." "Have you ever experienced what your doctors described as, quote, episodes where you perceived threats that others couldn't see?" The question was carefully crafted to make my hypervigilance sound like delusions rather than survival instincts. "I've experienced hypervigilance, which is a normal response to combat exposure." It means being aware of potential threats in your environment, not seeing threats that don't exist. But isn't it possible, Ms. Torres, that this hypervigilance caused you to interpret your family's normal behavior as malicious, when it was actually intended as support? Mr. Webb, documenting a party in my house while my daughter was dying isn't hypervigilance. It's evidence collection. Recording phone calls where family members ask me to lie to the police isn't paranoia. It's protecting myself from manipulation. Webb's voice took on the condescending tone of someone speaking to a confused child. Ms. Torres, is it possible that your military training has made it difficult for you to distinguish between actual combat situations and normal family disagreements? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I realized this was the moment everything depended on. Sophia was watching from the gallery, learning whether society would accept that her mother's war service made her an unreliable protector, or whether the truth would survive the assault. Mr. Webb, my military training taught me to gather intelligence, assess threats accurately, and protect the people under my care. During Sophia's medical crisis, I gathered intelligence by documenting my family's behavior. I assessed the threat accurately by recognizing that they were exploiting our vulnerability. And I protected Sophia by staying with her when everyone else abandoned her. Those aren't symptoms of mental illness. They're the skills that kept me alive overseas and kept my daughter safe during the worst week of our lives. Webb tried to interrupt, but I continued with the controlled intensity I'd learned in briefing rooms under pressure. You want to know the difference between a combat situation and a family disagreement? In combat, enemies try to kill you. In my family, they tried to use my willingness to die for my country as evidence that I'm too broken to protect my own child. Frankly, I'm not sure which attack is more cruel. The courtroom was completely silent. Webb's confident demeanor had cracked slightly, and I could see him recalculating his strategy. But he wasn't finished. Ms. Torres, isn't it true that you've had difficulty maintaining relationships since your deployment? Haven't family members expressed concerns about your behavior? My family has expressed concerns about my refusal to enable their harmful behavior, yes. They've been frustrated that I won't accept blame for their choices or pretend their cruelty is normal family dynamics. But your own mother has stated that you see enemies everywhere, that you turn minor disagreements into major conflicts. My mother said those things while drinking wine in my backyard during a party she threw while her granddaughter was on life support. I'll let the court decide whether her assessment of my mental state is reliable. Webb realized he was losing ground and made one final desperate attempt. Ms. Torres, do you really expect this court to believe that your entire family, parents, siblings, extended relatives, all conspired against you? Or is it more likely that your combat-related trauma has affected your ability to interpret their actions accurately? The question was designed to force me into either accepting blame for my mental state or sounding paranoid about family conspiracies. But Sophia's presence in the courtroom reminded me that this wasn't about legal strategy, it was about truth. Mr. Webb, I don't expect the court to believe anything. I expect the court to review the evidence. The social media posts they made while Sophia was dying. The credit card charges they authorized without permission. The recorded phone calls where they asked me to lie to police. The documented attempts to use my military service against my credibility. That evidence speaks for itself, regardless of anyone's opinion about veteran mental health. No further questions, Webb said, returning to his seat with the deflated posture of someone who just realized his strategy had backfired. As I stepped down from the witness stand, Sophia's small voice cut through the courtroom silence with crystal clarity. Mama, you told the truth really well. Her 8-year-old validation carried more weight than any legal victory could have. Judge Winters smiled slightly, the first emotion she'd shown during the entire proceeding, and called for a brief recess before closing arguments. During the break, Ada Chen approached me with something approaching satisfaction in her expression. That was exactly what we needed. Webb overplayed his hand, and you stayed calm under pressure. The jury saw a competent veteran parent defending her child, not the unstable victim he tried to portray. But the real validation came from Sophia herself, who approached me during recess with the serious expression she wore when she had something important to say. Mama, I understand now why you stayed with me when I was sick instead of going to their party. "You're a good soldier, and good soldiers don't leave people behind." Her simple statement crystallized everything I'd been fighting for. Not just legal vindication, but the right to have my service recognized as strength rather than weakness. My protection of her acknowledged as love rather than pathology. The closing arguments would determine the legal outcome, but Sophia's words had already delivered the verdict that mattered most. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 27 minutes. During that time, Sophia and I sat in the courthouse cafeteria sharing a bag of pretzels and playing tic-tac-toe on napkins, while I tried to project calm confidence despite the knots in my stomach. She'd been remarkably patient throughout the entire process, but I could see the strain starting to show in the way she kept checking the clock on the wall. "When the jury people come back, will they tell everyone that you're not broken?" she asked, using her 8-year-old vocabulary to summarize the central question of the entire trial. "They'll decide whether the people who hurt us have to face consequences for their choices," I explained. "But, sweetheart, no matter what they decide, you and I already know the truth about Mama's brain, right? It works really good, especially at protecting me," she said, with the absolute certainty that it sustained us both through this nightmare. When the bailiff called us back to the courtroom, my family filed in with expressions ranging from Carmen's theatrical anxiety to Luisa's stubborn defiance. My parents sat rigidly upright, still radiating the wounded dignity of people who couldn't understand why their behavior was being scrutinized by strangers. Webb shuffled through his papers with the nervous energy of someone who suspected his character assassination strategy had failed. Judge Winters entered with her usual efficiency, and the jury foreman, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and the bearing of someone who'd served in uniform himself, stood to deliver their verdict. "Your Honor, on the charge of unauthorized use of financial accounts, we find the defendants guilty." Carmen's sharp intake of breath was audible across the courtroom. Luis's face flushed red, his hands clenching into fists as the legal reality he'd dismissed began to solidify. "On the charge of unlawful entry to private property, we find the defendants guilty." My mother's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face as she realized the family reputation she'd been so desperate to protect was about to become a matter of public record. "On the charge of attempted solicitation of false statements to law enforcement, we find the defendants guilty." My father slumped in his chair, the patriarchal authority he'd wielded for decades collapsing under the weight of criminal conviction. Webb's shoulders sagged as his entire defense strategy, built on attacking my mental health rather than addressing his client's actions, crumbled completely. "On the charge of aggravated harassment during a family medical emergency, we find the defendants guilty." The final verdict hit like a thunderclap. Not only had the jury rejected Webb's attempts to weaponize my military service, they'd specifically acknowledged that my family's behavior during Sophia's crisis constituted a distinct and serious violation. They'd recognized that exploiting someone's absence during a medical emergency wasn't just criminal, it was cruel. Judge Winters thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for the following week, but before dismissing the court, she addressed my family directly with words that cut deeper than any legal penalty could have. "The evidence presented in this case represents a profound failure of family loyalty during a medical crisis. The defendants chose to exploit a mother's absence while she cared for her critically ill child, then attempted to weaponize her military service and mental health treatment to avoid accountability. This court finds such behavior not only criminal but morally reprehensible." She turned to me with an expression that conveyed both respect and understanding. "Ms. Torres, your documentation of events, your advocacy for your daughter's medical care, and your composure throughout this process demonstrate exactly the kind of strategic thinking and protective instincts this country relies on from its veterans. No parent should have to defend their fitness based on their service to this nation." As the courtroom emptied, Sophia and I remained seated for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The legal vindication was important, but the public acknowledgement that my military training was an asset rather than a liability felt revolutionary. Ada Chen approached us with genuine satisfaction in her expression. "Maria, this verdict sends a clear message that veteran mental health treatment cannot be weaponized against parental authority. We've set a precedent that will protect other military families facing similar attacks." Outside the courthouse, Sophia surprised me by asking to speak to the small group of reporters who'd been covering the trial. I'd tried to shield her from media attention, but she had something she wanted to say. "My mama is a really good soldier and a really good mama," she told the cameras with the matter-of-fact confidence that had sustained us both. "She stayed with me when I was sick even when other people said she was being dramatic. Soldiers protect people, and that's what she did for me." Her simple statement, broadcast that evening on local news, became the soundbite that defined our story. Not Webb's character assassination, not my family's attempts at victimization, but an 8-year-old's clear-eyed assessment of what had really happened. A veteran mother had protected her child, and that protection was strength, not sickness. The following week brought sentencing, where Judge Winters imposed financial restitution, community service, and mandatory counseling for my family members. But more significantly, she issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting them from interfering with my parental decisions or using my military service against my credibility in any future legal proceedings. The defendant's weaponization of Ms. Torres's PTSD diagnosis in military service represents a particularly insidious form of family abuse, Judge Winters stated from the bench. This court will not tolerate attempts to undermine veteran parents based on their service-related mental health treatment. Luis tried to address the court during sentencing, apparently still believing he could manipulate the situation with the right words. "Your Honor, we're a family that's been torn apart by miscommunication and misunderstandings. We just want to heal and move forward together." Judge Winters cut him off with surgical precision. "Mr. Torres, healing requires acknowledgement of harm, not continued denial of it. Your family had multiple opportunities to accept responsibility and make amends. Instead, you chose to attack the credibility of the victim. The time for family reconciliation ended when you decided to weaponize military service against parental authority." The legal proceedings concluded with a clear victory, but the real transformation had occurred much earlier. In Sophia's hospital room when I'd first decided to document their behavior. In the courthouse hallway when she'd asked about my soldier brain. In the moment when I'd realized that protecting her meant protecting all veteran families from similar attacks. That evening, as Sophia and I cooked dinner in our quiet kitchen, she asked the question I'd been expecting. "Mama, are we still family with them?" Blood doesn't automatically make people family, sweetheart. Family means people who show up when you need them, who support you during hard times, and who take responsibility when they hurt you. A real family doesn't abandon you during medical emergencies, or try to convince other people that your mama is too broken to take care of you. So we're family with each other? We're definitely family with each other. And with people like Jennifer from the hospital, and Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, and all the people who supported us instead of attacking us. She nodded thoughtfully, then returned to stirring the pasta sauce with the focused attention that meant she was processing complex information. "Mama, I'm glad your soldier brain works so well, otherwise you might not have been able to protect us." Her words crystallized the victory we'd achieved. Not just legal vindication, but the preservation of truth in the face of systematic gaslighting. They'd tried to convince the world that my military service made me an unreliable mother, but Sophia had never doubted that my training made me a better protector. The house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't since before Sophia's illness, but it was a different kind of peace than we'd known before. It was the peace that comes from surviving an assault and emerging stronger, from having your truth validated by strangers when family members tried to destroy it, from knowing that love and loyalty had been tested and proven genuine. Sophia fell asleep that night clutching the teddy bear Elena had brought to the hospital, but she'd renamed it Brave Bear. Not because it reminded her of her aunt's manipulative gesture, but because it had been with us during the battle for truth and justice. As I tucked her blankets around her small form, I realized that we'd won something more valuable than legal vindication. We'd demonstrated that veteran families could fight back against those who would weaponize military service, that children could witness accountability and justice, and that sometimes the greatest acts of protection happen not on foreign battlefields, but in courtrooms and hospital rooms where truth confronts manipulation. The war was over, but the peace we'd built was stronger than anything we'd lost. 6 months after the trial, Sophia and I had settled into a rhythm that felt genuinely peaceful for the first time since my deployment ended. Our mornings began with her excited chatter about school projects over breakfast, and our evenings wound down with bedtime stories that no longer carried the weight of unspoken trauma. The house that had once felt violated by my family's betrayal had become truly ours, a sanctuary we'd fought to protect, and won the right to inhabit without fear. The legal victory had ripple effects I hadn't anticipated. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez called regularly with updates about other veteran families facing similar challenges. Cases where my precedent was being cited to protect military parents from having their service weaponized against their parental authority. The Veterans Legal Defense Foundation had created a resource network specifically for veteran parents dealing with family members who exploited military mental health treatment. And they'd asked me to serve as a consultant. "Torres, you've become something of a legend in veteran family advocacy circles," Martinez told me during one of our monthly check-ins. "3 different cases this quarter have used your trial transcripts to counter attempts at weaponizing PTSD diagnoses. You've given other military families a roadmap for fighting back. The knowledge that our painful experience was protecting other families gave meaning to everything we'd endured." Sophia often asked about the other soldier mamas who were dealing with mean family members, and she'd started making drawings for children whose parents were fighting similar battles. Her latest creation showed a female soldier holding hands with a little girl under a rainbow, with "Brave Mamas Protect Kids" written in her careful 8-year-old handwriting. My relationship with traditional family structures had fundamentally shifted, but Sophia and I had built something stronger in its place. Jennifer, the ICU nurse who'd shown us kindness during Sophia's crisis, had become like a grandmother to Sophia, attending school plays and birthday celebrations with the reliability my biological family had never demonstrated. Dr. Reeves checked in periodically, not just about Sophia's health, but about our overall well-being, creating the kind of extended family network based on choice rather than obligation. The financial restitution from my family had been substantial, not just repayment for the party expenses, but damages for emotional distress and legal fees. I'd used part of it to establish a college fund for Sophia, but the larger portion went toward something more meaningful, a foundation supporting children of military families during medical crises, providing both practical assistance and emotional support when extended family networks failed. Sophia had named it the Brave Kids Foundation during one of our brainstorming sessions, explaining that sometimes kids have to be brave when grown-ups aren't doing their jobs right. Her 8-year-old wisdom had become the foundation's unofficial motto, and we'd already helped 17 families navigate medical emergencies without the additional trauma of family betrayal. The most unexpected transformation had been in Sophia herself. The experience of watching adults argue about truth and consequences had given her an unusually sophisticated understanding of accountability and justice. She'd become the kind of child who spoke up when classmates were being unfair, who asked pointed questions about why some grown-ups made excuses instead of apologies, who understood intuitively that protecting people was more important than keeping peace. "Mama, my friend Jessica's dad yells at her mom about money stuff," she told me one evening while we worked on homework together. But when I asked Jessica if her dad says sorry after he yelled, she said he just explained why the yelling was her mom's fault. That's not how apologies work, right? Her ability to recognize manipulation and emotional abuse in other relationships sometimes worried me. No 8-year-old should be so fluent in the dynamics of family dysfunction. But it also gave me confidence that she'd grown up understanding the difference between genuine love and performative affection, between accountability and excuse-making. My own relationship with my military service had evolved as well. Instead of something to be managed or defended, my PTSD treatment and combat experience had become sources of strength I could openly discuss. The VA had asked me to speak at several events about veteran family dynamics, and I'd discovered a talent for helping other military parents recognize when family members were exploiting their service-related vulnerabilities. The thing about military training is that it teaches you to see patterns, assess threats, and respond strategically, I'd told one group of veteran parents. Those same skills that kept us alive overseas can protect our children from family members who mistake our service for weakness. Your hypervigilance isn't paranoia, it's preparation. Your documentation isn't an obsession, it's evidence gathering. Your fierce protection of your children isn't a trauma response, it's love in action. The speech had resonated so strongly that the VA asked me to develop a workshop series for military families dealing with toxic family dynamics. Sophia often attended these sessions, coloring quietly in the corner while I spoke, and participants frequently commented that seeing a healthy, confident military child helped them envision positive outcomes for their own situations. 1 year after the trial, I received an unexpected letter from Carmen. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain, Nothing like the confident script I remembered from birthday cards and family invitations. Inside was a single page that began with words I'd never thought I'd see from any of my family members. Maria, I have been wrong about everything. The letter continued with what appeared to be genuine acknowledgement of the harm they'd caused, though it was clear Carmen still didn't fully understand the magnitude of their cruelty. She described months of court-mandated counseling that had slowly helped her recognize how they'd weaponized my military service and abandoned Sophia during her medical crisis. She wrote about missing Sophia's birthday, about regretting the loss of relationship with her niece, about finally understanding that their behavior had been indefensible. I know we can't undo what we did, the letter concluded, but I want you to know that some of us are finally learning to see ourselves clearly. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday Sophia might know that her tia Carmen learned to be better, even if it was too late to matter. I showed the letter to Sophia, curious about her reaction to this first acknowledgement of wrongdoing from my family. She read it carefully, her brow furrowed with the concentration she brought to difficult school assignments. She says she learned to be better, but she doesn't say what she learned, Sophia observed, with the analytical precision that reminded me of myself conducting intelligence briefings. And she says it might be too late to matter, but she doesn't ask what would make it matter. It sounds like she's still waiting for someone else to tell her what to do. Her assessment was more insightful than anything the family counselors had probably achieved. Carmen's letter was progress, but it was passive progress. Acknowledgement without initiative, regret without action, understanding without commitment to change. What do you think we should do about it? I asked Sophia. Keep being brave and protecting each other, she said simply. If she really learns to be better, she'll figure out how to show it without us having to teach her. And if she didn't really learn, then at least we won't get hurt again by believing people who just say the right words. That evening, as Sophia practiced piano in the living room and I prepared dinner in our peaceful kitchen, I reflected on how completely our lives had been transformed. We'd started this journey as victims of family betrayal during a medical crisis, and we'd emerged as advocates for military families, creators of support networks, and examples of what healing looked like when it was built on truth rather than denial. The house was filled with the sounds of Sophia's music, the aroma of her favorite meal cooking, and the quiet satisfaction of a life rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual protection. Outside, the garden I'd planted that spring was blooming with flowers Sophia had chosen, bright purple petunias that matched her favorite sweater, yellow marigolds that reminded her of sunshine, and white roses that she said looked like the hospital flowers but prettier because they were ours. We'd lost a family, but we'd gained something more valuable, the unshakable knowledge that we could protect each other, that love required action rather than words, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from building something beautiful in the space they tried to burn down. Sophia finished her piano practice and joined me in the kitchen, standing on her step stool to help stir the pasta sauce with the focused attention she brought to all our shared tasks. Mama, are you happy we went through all that scary stuff? The question surprised me with its complexity. I'm not happy we went through it, sweetheart, but I'm proud of how we handled it, and I'm grateful it taught us who we really are and what we're capable of protecting. Me too, she said, adding cheese to the sauce with the careful precision of someone who understood that the best things in life required attention to detail. We're really good at taking care of each other. As we sat down to dinner in our sunlit kitchen, surrounded by the peace we'd fought to build and the love we'd proven could survive any assault, I realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not the destruction of our enemies, but the creation of a life so genuinely peaceful that their chaos could no longer touch us. We had everything we needed, and we'd learned to protect it fiercely. The war was over, and we had won not just justice, but joy. 5 years later, Sophia and I stood in the courtroom where our story had reached its turning point, but this time we weren't defendants or victims. We were there to witness the graduation ceremony for the first class of the Brave Kids Foundation's Family Advocacy Program, 12 military families who'd completed our 6-month course on protecting children during family medical crises. Sophia, now 13 and taller than my shoulder, wore the purple dress she'd chosen for the occasion. "Mama, look," she whispered, pointing to a young mother holding her son's hand in the front row. "That's the family from Texas whose grandparents tried to take custody during his cancer treatment. I squeezed Sophia's hand, remembering our first meeting with that family. Their story had been achingly familiar, a military mother's fitness questioned by relatives who weaponized her PTSD diagnosis while she fought for her child's life. Now they stood together, legally protected and emotionally healed, ready to help other families navigate similar battles. Judge Winners, who'd become a champion for veteran family rights since our case, addressed the graduating families with the same no-nonsense clarity that had validated our truth years earlier. You've learned that protecting your children isn't a symptom of trauma. It's the highest expression of love. Take that knowledge and help others find their strength. As we left the courthouse, Sophia surprised me with an observation that captured how far we'd both traveled. Mama, I used to think family was just people you were born with. Now I know families are people who choose to fight for each other. Our story began with betrayal and abandonment, but it became something larger. Proof that military families can overcome those who would exploit their service, and that children can witness justice being done. To everyone listening, your story matters. Your voice matters. Your fight for truth matters. If this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and share your own stories in the comments below. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, and sometimes that truth changes everything. Until next time, stay strong, stay vigilant, and never stop protecting what matters most.